What's going on, guys? Welcome back to my workbench and world of modeling. And in this video I want to talk to you guys about a subject that might be relatable to quite a few modelers, especially modelers who maybe are in my shoes where they have a couple years of experience doing this kind of thing. Maybe they've built some models to kind of get into the locomotive detailing hobby, really. Maybe they've done this to some rolling stock, things like that. Basically what happens is when we start modeling, we start building locomotives, we start building rail cars, parts of your model railroad, structures and things like that. And obviously when you first start out, you're not going to be perfect. You're not going to get everything exactly. Maybe there's some things you could have done better. Maybe there's some things that you just didn't feel like your skills were up to enough. Let's say, for example, a locomotive like this where maybe the locomotive had so much modification that you just didn't feel like having to modify all that. You just wanted a basic paint job, okay, and that's fine. But really what happens, I guess, as your modeling evolves is those little things that maybe you left out before, well, they have a tendency to kind of come back and bite you in the butt, so to speak. What happens is you hold on to these models for a couple years and you're proud of them for a little while. Yeah, they look good, they run around your club layout or model railroad or a little shelf layout, whatever you got, and you're happy with them for the time. But in a lot of cases, as your modeling progresses and you get better with your skills, your customization, everything like that, things start to bug you. And that is my case here. As an example, I have before us two SD40-2 locomotives, and they're both in the striking BC rail style red, white, and blue paint scheme. These are both Athearn offerings. These were done years back now. In the early RTR run, SD40-2, this was like the advanced version of the SD40-2 after the initial run that they did in the RTR line using original blue box chassis and shells. They went back and completely retooled the SD40-2s with brand new cabs, noses, car bodies. They completely re-engineered and retooled the chassis, everything like that. So they're a real, I guess, step up in advancements for Athearn at this point. But these locomotives do have a couple years on them. They go back quite a while. But staying on topic, the SD40-2 in front is a finished locomotive that I did years ago. Matter of fact, this was one of the last locomotives I did at my original workbench when I still lived in Macomb, Ohio. So we're going back to the glory days of my introduction into the world of modeling, essentially. Now, let's talk about what my issues are with this model. I'm obviously happy that I did a model of this locomotive, HLCX 6204. It's a unique one because it's a Kennicott copper railway locomotive, very unique, and I had originally built this using the Athearn model, and I've held on to it for years and years. And again, what ends up happening is there are things maybe you didn't do as great, or maybe there's some details or things that you just were happy with at the time, but now they just seem kind of questionable, right? So I'm at this stage, or at a crossroads rather, where I've gone back, I've changed a lot of my equipment, swap things around, and that just happens after a while. I start selling stuff off that I'm not happy with. But a locomotive like this, for example, I guess I just get tired of my older style of weathering where things are a lot more chunky. I was relying a lot more on straight acrylics to do rust effects and things like that. So things start looking kind of rough, honestly, and they don't compare and match well to what I can honestly do with my current modeling abilities. So this is where you have to make a few basic decisions. If you have a model like this, you want to keep it, but it doesn't look right with all your other models. The decision is you either try to go back and restore the one that you have, and in this case this one, or you completely rebuild and redo your model. And this is a big decision because you have to try to, I guess, compare all of the things that you've done right on the first one, what outweighs each other, what's worth keeping on your original model. Maybe it's too far gone, for example. Maybe there's just too much that you would have to change that it would just destroy the complete paint job or anything like that. So you got to be smart when you, I guess, compare what you would like to have changed. Sometimes, and in some cases, you do have to completely start from scratch again. And that's actually why I have this locomotive here. I originally bought this on eBay to replace this locomotive, 6204. And the reason I did was because there was just so much stuff that I wanted to do. For example, changing the roof weathering and things like that. To where I just end up having to repaint so much of it that it would just destroy the originality of the original model anyways. But what I've kind of come to, and what I wanted to make this video topic on, is how do I restore a locomotive like this? How do we go about changing stuff? Because as I started taking this one apart and really looking at it, I really got to thinking, well, this is an original model I did. It's one of my last original models. I really don't want to leave it because it has a lot of nostalgia attached to it. I have a lot of good memories with this locomotive, and I've put so much work into it that is stuff that I just simply don't want to do. For example, how I completely rebuilt the nose. As you can see, the stock model has a nose light. I really don't want to have to do that again. I did all the cab modifications where it has been basically prepped for a full cab interior. It has an open cab door. That's again something I really don't want to have to do if I can help it, because it's a lot harder to cut out the doors and modify everything on these Athearns. And then of course having to modify a fuel tank, because the fuel tank on this locomotive is custom. I had to make this by kit batching a stock fuel tank for the exact size, because these have a really interesting size fuel tank, and it was a real pain to do this originally on the model. I don't really want to lose that. Now, the other problems that are on the stock model is that it doesn't run well, the trucks are not great, the fuel tank needs work, and then the pilot details as well are not up to my current standards. The detailing is pretty rough, the ditch lights don't look very good, the handrails, a lot of the weathering is pretty chunky, so I'm basically at a point where I have to change all this. I have to replace the lights in this thing too, because as you can see the locomotive doesn't have lights. So what I basically decided to do in this video, to sum all this long-winded explanation up, is I want to restore this model and put it up as much as possible to my current standards of weathering and detailing. I want to change a few parts on it, in this case the truck's pilot details. We'll try to replace some details on the top if we need to. We're going to try to touch up some paint. We're going to try to do some work to the nose, and we're going to do a cab interior. We're also going to change out the rear pilot too. So we're going to do some minor disassembly, and we're just going to try to touch up the weathering, and we're going to try to save as much as we can on this model and try to bring it up as much as possible to my current standards. And I'm going to show you guys a step-by-step of how I approach this. Again, some of you guys might just be more inclined to want to replace your model, and that's fine. If you have another model and maybe it's easy to replace, then go for it. You can just simply go in, just get another model where you have basically a similar starting point, and then go from there. But again, because I have nostalgia attached to this thing, because it's already for the most part set up how I want to be able to save it. So we're going to go back, disassemble this a little bit, and we're going to detail it up a little bit. Basically, start your deconstruction in various steps. Think about how you want to take it over and replace some things. For example, I'm going to remove the snowplow, I'm going to remove the ditch lights, the drop step, and I'm going to remove the coupler boxes and air hoses. I'm going to replace all of these parts. Same thing on the rear. Going to upgrade these a little bit, do some minor redetailing, just upgrade things a little bit, clean that up. Really, the air hose, other than that, I mean, I could probably get by. Again, this is why you really got to decide really what you want to change. The pilot on this end isn't too bad. The air hose kind of sucks. I might replace the coupler lift bar, we'll see. But we'll just kind of do it in steps. So I'm also going to unscrew the coupler boxes so we can access the inside, because I need to look at the motor on this thing, because this locomotive also doesn't run that great. So I want to try to do a little bit of motor tuning to this. So I'm going to go ahead and pop the shell off, and then I'm going to show you guys how I disassemble everything. I'm going to remove these pilot details here, and we'll come back and I'll show you guys what it looks like. So the interior here is in good shape. The problem that I'm noticing here, and I think one of the big root causes of the locomotive running like crap, the gears are dry. There is no lube at all. And what lube there is feels like Vaseline. It's greasy, but clunky. There's a lot of debris inside these gears, so upon inspection, I'm realizing that I think the majority of my problems here are related to these trucks. Thus, I'm going to take the trucks apart. So I'm going to replace the side frames. I'm going to take the trucks apart. I'm going to completely scrub and clean them with detergent, and we're going to re-lube them. I generally use Labelle plastic-friendly lubricant, and I'm going to also be doing both trucks here. I'm also going to be inspecting the wire leads from the trucks, and I'm going to be inspecting the light bulbs. I may even upgrade these lights to LED lights, we'll see. But you can see the other thing we're looking for here, the board actually has some loose wires, so that also might not be helping me with in terms of running. You can see this one is very loose. It's almost about to pop out. Matter of fact, if I pulled on that, that would probably slide right out. So, For the basics of restoring the locomotive and actually making sure it runs, these are always the telltale signs, the things you want to look for. The motor's running like crap, and the first thing we notice, there's basically no lubrication in these trucks. It's greasy, it's binding really bad, and it's actually really hard to turn these wheels. So the issue is related to the trucks. Now, obviously, it can get a little bit more complicated. Some things can be related to the motor, in which case these CAN motors are relatively easy to disassemble, but you do got to be a little bit more patient, and you got to try to keep track of all the little parts so that you don't mix them up. And I would just go in and maybe just do a little light lubrication on the bearings here, which I will do on this locomotive. I'll give it a couple test runs, and we'll see how it turns out. But basically, I'm just going to go in, I'm going to take these trucks apart, and I'll show you guys what it looks like. I'm also just going to go ahead and remove these little worms real quick. We'll get these out of the way. So now we have a wild pile of parts here, but we got the disassembly down to what we need. You can see the cab has been disconnected. I've removed the fans because we're going to try to clean up the top a little bit and take some of this chunky weathering off. We want to try to save as much of this red as we can, so we'll see what we can do there. Let me see here, what else? I've removed the pilot details, as you can see, both ends. And I've removed the lights, all that stuff. So it's basically a case of having to do some minor repainting and then going back and changing the details around a little bit. The underbody is prepped up. We have the motor ready for lube, and then we just need to start fixing up the trucks. This Athearn plastic is extremely brittle on these early units, and I'm going to have to replace a few parts because, as you can see, a couple of these little couplings broke off, but that's alright, we'll replace those. The cab came off actually pretty clean. I was a little worried with that door damaging that because I had to scratch build that little strip there, the base strip, and things like that, but it actually came off pretty clean, so I'm pretty happy. But we are going to try to clean up the cab a little bit if we can. We'll try to scrub some of that off, and we'll try to redo it a little bit, so we'll see what we can do with that. But just try to dissect it, take it apart in little chunks, and work on one thing at a time. Obviously, I took quite a bit of work disassembling it, but I would have rather taken and disassembled the entire thing before starting anything anyway. That way I'm not risking damaging something. Like, I wouldn't detail the pilots up and then continue to start stripping the shell, because then I risk, while moving this thing around and roughhousing it a little bit, damaging stuff. Get all your disassembly done, and then you can start from the ground up, basically. So I'm going to go in, I'll clean up these trucks, and we'll lube them, and then we'll put those back. So when you re-lubricate the gears, I like to use the Label 108 oil here with the fine tip applicator, and I'll just go in and put a drop. Alright, just a drop of glue, or not glue, but oil. And now you wouldn't want to use glue, that would be bad, but you just put a little drop right on each little spur where the gear slides back through, and you'll just lubricate that. Less is more, it doesn't take much, but you can see right there that already pretty much does a wonder. These are much looser, they're not binding, they're spinning properly now, so that's good. We fixed that problem. I'll still go in, I'll probably put a little bit of lube on these gears as we reassemble the truck, and I'll demonstrate that if I have to. But it's all pretty simple, and then you just can go back and reassemble the truck one little bit at a time, so it's easy. Alright, the truck is propped up here. I'm going to take this oil and I'm going to put a drop on each point of these gears here, just like this. Drop, drop, just like that. And then you can just go in, spin these wheels. You'll get a little of that oil on these gears, and it'll spread a little bit. But as you can see, now the gears aren't binding, flowing a lot more smoothly, so that alone will improve the operation and performance of this locomotive way more. Alright, so one other thing I want to address before I actually put the trucks on. By the way, they're fully reassembled now and they're lubricated and ready to go. You can see that they perform really nicely now. I want to go ahead and touch up the underbody a little bit, because as you can see, when I initially did the weathering, it was pretty piss poor, to be honest. It was very on the spot, kind of crappy, just was trying to rush through it. I want to repaint all this on this silver deck so that we hide all the silver paint and make it look nice and grimy. It'll be really even, and it'll be prepped for powder work and everything like that. So what I'm going to do is, I've mixed up my earth brown acrylic and black, my trusty little mix here. I'm going to go in and I'm going to start painting and refining all of these little areas, mainly that little lip. Normally this would be where the conduit and everything run, so I'm working the paint up onto that. I'm not really worried about up here, I just want to get all this painted mainly. You can hit this up if you'd like, that's perfectly fine, but for the most part, that's not really what you're going to see. You're going to be seeing this little lip here. And then all the silver does show, even if the locomotive's on its side, and from a distance you can see it, and that's why it was annoying. So I'm just trying to cover all this up. I might do one more coat on this because, as you can see, it's a little blotchy, but that's just to be expected with metallic paints. I'm just painting acrylic right over it, so the coverage isn't that great. But just go in there and try to blend everything together. Same thing with the coupler box. Remember, that's going to be an area you're going to be able to see from the ground level, so make sure we get all this covered up as well. Okay, as you can see, I have the worm reattached, and now we're going to just put a little bit of this oil right here, just a little bit on top there, and just repeat that for the other truck as well. Once you get that lubricated, we'll put the cap back on. Make sure obviously the truck is completely in place, and that'll snap back on. So now that one truck is on, and I'll just proceed to put the other truck on, and then I'll reattach the wire leads. Once we get all this put back together, we'll give it a test run, and we're also going to clean the wheels. Alright, so the chassis is all back together, and you can see I've reassembled everything. Pretty basic setup here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put this locomotive on the test track, and we're going to get it not only to test run here and make sure everything's working properly, but we're also going to clean these wheels. Because these are pretty dirty. This locomotive actually was ran quite a few times, kind of during the time I was actually running stuff. So it got pretty dirty. You can see it definitely not as bad. Still pretty noisy though, but we'll have to put a little bit more lube on this thing too. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to take the paper towel, since it's wanting to go in this direction. I'm going to put it down like this, and most of you guys have probably seen how to do this by now, but basically I just take and, hang on, let me prop my camera up here. Probably should have prepared for this better. I'm just going to take, and I'm going to run the locomotive just over the paper towel, and this will get the wheels cleaned up enough. So I'll put these on like this, throttle it up, and just get these wheels to run on there. This will clean off all the grease and everything on the wheels. There we go. Picked up a little bit of grease, so that's one. And then the opposite side. Oopsie. Come on. Sure it's on there now. See, one more time. Oopsie. Actually got the wire bent in there. There we go. Now I'll run it. There we go. That one was pretty dirty as well. See the amount of grease and dirt on there. And now, runs a little bit smoother, as you can see. Alright, so that's a good start there. That's just a basic preparation of the underbody. It's pretty much prepped. We can start reassembling it. We'll do final weathering details, and then we'll move on to the shell. Well, we've since moved the locomotive back to the bench, and what I'm doing now is the last minute disassembly. So I'm going to take the dynamic brake off, and I want to clean this off. You can see there's a lot of exhaust and everything on this. Even though it's clear coated, I should be able to clean this off with a little bit of rubbing alcohol, and I just want to carefully scrub it off. I can be a little bit more rough with this, shouldn't take the paint off, but obviously with these areas I'm going to have to be a little bit more careful. It's going to be slow Q-tip work to scrub this paint off, especially on the back area. It's going to be a nightmare, but we're going to get it back down to bare red, and we're going to clean this up. I shouldn't have to repaint the grills, hopefully, and I also got to remove the black paint off the nose because I completely missed that the real locomotive does not have that. And if we refer to the prototype photos, it is not black. It is red. It's just very dirty. So I'm going to have to paint it like a mismatched color, maybe like a brown wash. And then we'll do the rust on that. So that's where we're at with that. Debating what to do with the sides. If I want to try to scrub some of this off. I'm not really sure. I don't really want to touch the sills for the most part. I might do some work to the battery box area. And now we're going to talk about the cab. I want to do a cab interior, so I've done a mock-up cab stand. So here's the control console with the gauge cluster there. And then inside the cab, I've made a little speed recorder, or the digital display, that little box there. It's glued to the cab, as you can see. Just be careful not to get any glue on the windows. I'm going to put a little decal gauge on that. I'm going to paint the console black, put the gauges on that too, and once the cab is fitted back on the shell, you'll be able to see all the little gauges and everything, which is pretty cool. And for any of you who don't really remember how I do this, let me pull out a locomotive so you can see this. So this isn't going to be easy, but let me try here very carefully. I'll try to remove this engine. This is a CSX SD40 I did. If you recall in the video, I had done a cab interior similar. There you can see those gauges. See, that really stands out. You look at the locomotive from the ground, it actually looks like the gauges are on. So that's why I like that effect. So I'm going to try to do that for 6204 here. Got that painted. Now while I'm waiting for the first coat of paint to dry on the stand, and before I can apply decals, I want to start removing some of the paint. As you can see, I already did the clean air cover there, the grill. And we're going to do it also on the dynamic brake and the cab. But we need to be really careful because we can accidentally strip this paint off if we're not careful. So I recommend, if you're going to take old weathering off any model, use 70%, not any higher, but 70%, possibly 50% isopropyl alcohol will work too. I think it will. I think it'll be strong enough to be able to pull the paint off. But it's enough that it burns through the paint, but you're not going to damage the undercoat because you need to be very careful with this. You don't want to work it too much. Get the paint off. Neutralize it with another Q-tip full of water, wash it off, dry it off, get that stuff off. As you can see, there's still a little bit of residue on there, but once I re-dull coat this and clean it up, that'll blend back in and it should be fine. But for this section here, I'll demonstrate it real quick. Let me put the camera down for a second. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take and I'm going to dip my Q-tip in a little bit of this alcohol. Okay. Now I'm going to take a little bit of that off. So I now have the Q-tip full of alcohol. I'm going to try to do this live here. Watch as I scrub the paint off. Get a good firm hold of the model. Start working that Q-tip over the paint. Give it a little bit of pressure. Start scrubbing that paint off best you can. It's not all going to give right away. Get off what you can. Just keep working it until you get all that off. Then move on to the next step and just work in small increments at a time. Don't try to force yourself to smash through this. Just do one little bit at a time and that should come off like this. There. Now before we get too far ahead, again, wet Q-tip with water, neutralize the alcohol, get that off so that it doesn't keep cutting through that paint. You see that we don't have any paint bleeding onto the Q-tip. That's a good sign. So no paint's burning off. But basically, that's the key to removing most of this old weathering. It'll work on acrylic, it'll work on oil paint, powder work, anything like that. It'll take it right off. So we've disassembled it even more, and you can see I've actually taken and removed the handrails now. They're safely tucked over there. I've removed all the paint off the nose that I didn't want, the dynamic brake hatch. I've cleaned up the fans. And I got the underbody mostly prepped. There's some more fans over there. Let's talk about the cab real quick, because the cab was kind of fun, because I had to poke around with this thing without damaging anything. I tried repainting a portion of the roof, and I got this really bizarre washy effect. I have no idea how the fuck that happened, but I guess it's not a huge deal because I'm going to be doing some pretty heavy weathering up there anyway. And on the cab sides, I just cleaned things up a little bit, added a little bit more weathering to the door, because these all-weather doors get real beat up. And obviously this has been a couple of years now, so this locomotive is, if it was still around, whoopsie, if it was still around, would be a lot more beat up now. So That's what I was kind of trying to take into account, because all the pictures of this locomotive go only up to, I believe, 2012. This locomotive, 6204, and its sister locomotive, 6206, were both scrapped at the exact same time in the exact same scrapyard. So go figure. Both these locomotives are lost forever in time, but the pictures exist. So in my world of modeling, the locomotive is still around. But what you got to remember is how to, I guess, if you're going to model a locomotive as it might appear in the future, then you got to take some ideas by looking at how other similar locomotives, maybe in that exact paint scheme, might age and get a kind of an idea. And you got to remember, lease locomotives are some of the most abused. They're not taken care of. Paint gets neglected. They don't get handled very well. A lot of times you're going to see a lot of paint chipping on the doors. The sunshades start getting pretty ratty. Lots of rust on the cab. So that's what I've really focused on here. So I've enhanced it quite a bit from what it originally looked like. But it has a prototypical vibe to it, and I really like it. It looks really crappy, and it works out real well. You got little primer spots, you got little areas where it looks like they tried to do some temporary repairs, like did some paint patching. You can see where some of the paint is chipping away, where some of the crappy decals are peeling off and the rust is taking over. I like the way the numbers look because they're starting to also get damaged a little bit. The door, of course, looks awesome. Now, my favorite part about the cab is the little speed recorder, which we added inside the cab. There you can actually see it has the little gauge in there. So when you look inside the cab, there it is. From the ground, there it is. Isn't that cool? Gotta give that a moment of silence. That's so epic. Of course, it'll look 10 times better once it's actually attached back. And you'll see the stand there as well. As you can see, we have all three gauges on the stand as well, on the pedestal, which is sweet. Alright, now, onto the shell. Again, I've removed the handrails, and what I'm planning on doing is redoing the blue here. I realized that when I did the blue on this model originally, I hand-painted that blue to try to fade it, and after looking at it this whole time, I realized how bad a job I actually did, and I want to try to fix that. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to try to clean up these sills a little bit because there's a lot of powder on these sills. As you can see, it's actually old chalk. This was before I even started using powders. So I got to try to clean some of this up next. I've cleaned up the white and the red a little bit by removing a lot of my crappy older weathering. And what I'm going to do also is repaint the steps. I'm going to repaint the sills blue, but I'm going to actually use a different blue, a lighter blue. This one here, true blue. Same blue I actually use on my CSX locomotives, and this will not only give me the right blue color, but it'll fade it and lighten it a little bit more, because as you can see even in this photo, the blue faded down quite a bit, so we need to get it to this. So we'll take this and turn it to this. Alright, so obviously you got to be careful because we're masking over a paint job which has weathering and decal work over it. We got to be careful that we don't peel anything off that we don't want to. What we're going to have to do is make some little paper masks underneath the tape where it'll be over the HLCX logo and these warning labels, for example, because if you put tape over those, you're going to peel them sure as shit right off the model, and then you're going to have to start all over again. Which, if you want to replace the decals, that's fine, don't worry about it. In this case, I don't have a set of these HLCX decals for this type anymore, and I really don't want to have to do them again if I can help it, because they're actually dead on perfect to what's on the model. I don't even remember what decal sheet it is. I know it's long out of production, but as you can see, I still have them on both sides and they're in excellent shape, so I want to preserve those. So what I'm going to do is take a little strip of paper underneath the masking tape, just put it right over the HLCX and then put the tape over it. That'll protect our decals. That's a handy little trick to remember when you want to try to mask over stock decal work like that. So we're going to mask everything above the deck where the white starts. That's going to be masked underneath will be blue, and we're going to basically repaint that with the airbrush. We'll touch up the tanks a little bit, redo the end pilots. Quite a bit more work ahead of us, but it's all pretty easy stuff. There's nothing to be worried about. We're going to really enhance this model now, and we're going to be able to really, I guess at this point, refine and perfect things, and then from that point on it's all fun because then we can start all the reweathering and get basically the entire shell up to our current standard of weathering. Okay, so when you want to mask over decals, what you use is a little bit of regular paper. You can use tissue too. but I like the paper because you can precisely cut it, preferably printer paper. But I just cut a strip out like this, and you can take the paper and you can put it over your decals. So there's the decals we want to protect. You put it right there, just like that, and then essentially you can take your tape and go over that and mask off that white, and now your decals are protected. Never mask over the decals, because like I said, you will peel them off. It's just a helpful little trick. So now I'll take my blue painter's tape, I'll mask all this off, and I'm going to spray the blue. It's looking a lot different now. You can see the blue is actually fixed, so it looks faded. It looks like what it needs to be. So it's actually the proper color now. You'll notice it's the same on the cab a little bit. I touched the blue up. Yeah, I had to sacrifice the weathering, but I kind of decided to do this last minute. I'll just re-weather that. It's not a huge deal. I guess the last thing I'm trying to decide now is if I want to fix the red, because the red on the real locomotive oranged out as it faded. And as you can see in this very late photo in its career, I think this is actually one of the last times it was in service before it got scrapped, you can see just how much that red faded down to almost a light reddish orange tint. So I'm thinking about trying to maybe fade this red down with some orange, and the only thing I'd have to do with that is basically repeat the process we did for the underbody, just on the top. But the other issue that makes this a little bit more tricky is that we'd have to try to mask off the cab and around all these little details. It's not the worst, but it's doable. And then we'd have to try to paint the top of the nose, and then we'd have to paint all of these individual little chevrons, which might get to be a bit of a pain. So I'm kind of trying to decide if it's worth doing that or not, but I'm kind of leaning towards maybe just leaving it as is. You know, obviously all these photos are bright and sunny. I think with like shadows and everything like that, maybe it'll blend in a little bit. But yeah, I really am kind of just leaning towards that. Obviously on the bottom too, I'm gonna have to repaint the tanks silver, and then the fuel tank's still black. The trucks are completely grimed over. We'll have to paint those. Pilots I'm gonna have to repaint. New snowplow, the details, that'll all come next. So that's other things I'm gonna have to worry about. Let's talk about the trucks just for a second too, and then I'll show you guys the cab. Or do I need to show you guys the cab? No, I actually don't. So it's just the trucks right now. So for the truck side frames, the original ones I was not pleased with. They were ones that I tried to do the spinning bearing caps on, and they just didn't work that well. It caused some running issues. I also over-weathered the crap out of them, so these are no good. Anyways, I've replaced these with new side frames from a scrap UP locomotive, another SD40-2, and I've modified them accordingly to match what's on the prototype. So you have the bearing that's exposed on each truck set. You have this little bracket that's welded to the truck frame, and then you have the sanding lines. On one of the front trucks, you have the speed recorder in the proper place, exposed bearing, all those nice details. So I'm just going to have to touch up, paint those, and then we'll weather those accordingly. The fans are all cleaned up, so I'm going to just wait to install those until I get the roof weathering done, and then I'll reattach them and then blend them in with everything else. So we're still coming along here, but you can see even after just 2 days of work, we've accomplished quite a bit on this locomotive, and we've really fixed a lot of the issues already that have, I guess, really bugged me over the years keeping this thing, and one of the reasons I almost sold it. So in hindsight, I'm definitely glad I didn't, because in the end it would have been way more work to have to completely redo another base model to this level of detail, and then modify everything, do all the detailing, modifying the cab, the trucks, the nose, everything. It paid off in the end, because all we had to do here was strip it down, repaint some partial things, and now we get to do all the fun stuff, which is just touching up the paint and doing some final detailing and then re-weathering it. Alright, the rest of the repainting is pretty much finished, other than painting some other details, but if you recall, the pilot details weren't that great. I replaced everything on the front pilot, new ditch lights, new drop step, new handmade coupler lift bar, custom snowplow. The rear pilot is prepped up. You can see all the details have been added, and obviously the paint looks kind of rough, but we're going to weather this up and we'll blend it back in. So it's essentially ready for the starting point of weathering. You'll notice I also painted the walkways too. They're black again. That's yellow on the prototype. So all that's prepped, so I'm going to start weathering this now.
Pilots are looking real good. They're all detailed. All the paint work is finished. I repainted the air tanks on the side, and then I did the rust work there because now it's time to actually start weathering the thing. So I did the rust chipping that's along the side sill here on this side. I added the safety striping, so that's prepped. The end is prepped as well with the detailing, and then on the side here also it's prepped. So we got a good base now to actually start going in and do good weathering. Because remember, all the original weathering wasn't very good. So we're going back and now fixing it. And starting point here is the cab. This is always going to be the best part to start because it's the smallest area to work with. And it generally will give you a good idea of what techniques you need to adapt. So what I'm trying to model is the rust because, as you can see, it chipped up pretty good on the roof, where the rust kind of fanned out, and then it's all over the top of this locomotive, all through the fans, along the radiator section. This is a lot of work, and don't get overwhelmed by doing something like this. Try to cut it into manageable chunks where you do the cab first, then you do the air cabinet first, then do the dynamic brake section first, do one side at a time, for example, and then blend them together, and then the same for the radiators. You just cut it into manageable chunks, and then eventually your work ties together. I experimented with the rust on the roof, and it's kind of hard to see because the cab's showing up kind of orange, but you can see the rust. I just painted all that on with acrylic and a fine tip brush. So that gave us the base effect that we need. A little bit of soot, a little bit of oil work, and that'll blend even better. So that's a good starting point. The nose is not permanently attached just yet. I just did a little bit more rust work and just blended things together to do some chipping and things to blend it. So that looks pretty good too. I'm going to use a earth brown and black paint mix, and what I like to do with the dot technique is just go in and start adding some of this rust, and you're going to try to avoid making them too much of a dot. It's a little bit hard to break it up, but you can kind of go back in, add maybe some more texture, or kind of break up the flow of that dot a little bit if it starts kind of looking too much like a dot. You just don't want it to look like a dead circle like it was applied by a paintbrush, because most of the time the rust in real life is going to form and it's going to have all these random intricate shapes that are unique and sometimes hard to replicate. So you're really just trying to be extremely random with your paint application. Again, I'm using the earth brown and black mix from the acrylic, and I'm just using a fine tip brush. This isn't my normal fine tip brush that I would use. I'm just using something a little bit finer, and I just want to go in and add a little bit of rust just around where it should be based on the prototype photos. There's a lot of rust up on the top of this where the paint just deteriorated, and so I'm just trying to go back in and add it as best as I can. It's a bit hard too because in all the photos of this thing it's covered in so much soot, so this thing is a real oil burner. But I can still get a good idea that there's a lot of paint deterioration up here from the pictures, because you can see just dark spots where it looks like there's not even any paint at all, and a lot of it's pretty deteriorated. I don't think, well, this thing was never really repainted. I think they were painted in the 80s, so yeah, a lot of this is going to be just deteriorated and eaten away. So I just go in there and just kind of keep it random, you know, just go in and just paint little dots. The dot technique is one of the best things you can do for models, though, because you can get so much texture and detail. And if you're one of those guys who likes to go in and spend hours blending and doing pigment work, say for example if you were doing it on like a tank, model ship, or an airplane or something like that, you could have so much fun literally doing this for hours, just one little section at a time, just painting little dots. I think it's the most fun part about extreme prototype weathering. I know some of you are like, what the hell are you talking about? Are you smoking crack? It actually is fun once you get going on this, because it takes so little effort. I know a lot of you guys say, like, especially with older gentlemen who might have arthritis, anything like that. I have severe nerve damage in my hand, it should be known. My hand hurts all the time. A lot of times I get the numb fingers. It's because I'm a drummer, and with the stick, holding the sticks, everything like that, the shock of a rebound on the stick, everything like that, I held the sticks wrong for years. It actually caused some nerve damage, so I have a permanent shake to my hand, especially my right hand because I'm right-handed. But even still, it doesn't hurt me at all to just hold the brush for, you know, maybe a couple minutes at a time, just working in little sections to do this, and it's so worth it in the end. So again, I'm going to just dare you guys to go out there and just force yourself to do this. Practice on a piece of paper or a scrap boxcar for a few minutes, and you can get this little dot chip technique down in minutes. It's so simple. It doesn't take any effort. You can see I can just literally go in, randomly just put these little things in, and get some great effects. Basically, this is the technique I'm going to use for this entire roof. Obviously, some sections are going to be heavier than others. Don't go out of control. Just try to refer to what's on the prototype, get it as best you can, and get it to where you're happy with it. But remember, this is just a base effect. We're still going to go back and behind and do a little bit of oil wash and things like that. I'm not going to show every little step here either. This isn't a detailed weathering video. I just want to show you guys some of the techniques that I'm trying to use for this thing to blend it all together. So now this is up to my standards in terms of weathering. Everything looks much better. So now I'm putting everything back together because I pretty much got the nose and the cab done, so there's no need for them to be disassembled anymore. So I just reinstalled the lights, and I installed the nose today, and then I just inspected all the work. The next thing I did on top was just go in and I added a little bit of oil paint. You can see how it's this darker oil color. It's just drying right now, that's why. But the roof is pretty much done. And if we look at the dynamic brake section and all that, you can see the fine chipping, all our grime and everything. I hit up the fans a little bit more, and then I started prepping the car bodies. So you got a little bit of rust, everything like that down the side. So that's all taken care of. Tank's done, side's done on this end here. Touched up the weathering on this end. I got to be careful so it doesn't fall over. And then this end's done. There you go. So that's all tied together. So now we just got to start reassembling some more stuff. I'm going to start reinstalling these handrails, and I'm going to get these painted next. I'm going to install those, and then we're going to start working on the side railings, and then we got to actually weather up the deck again, because remember we repainted this, and then we're going to start doing final weathering. Alright guys, we are at the finish line to yet another successful project, and we now have a completed model that looks like it was just built off this workbench today. Where it's up to my current standards, and you wouldn't believe that this thing was built years ago, and we've been able to basically salvage it. And I know this one got a little long, but I really hope that this encourages you guys to not just throw away and ditch your old projects, that there is still a potential to save them with your new techniques that you might learn over time, and you can perfect your models as you go. You don't necessarily have to sell them off and start afresh. If you can save a model, it's definitely worth it in the long run. It saves you money too, especially for models like this where they're hard to get. This was definitely a great resurrection project. The pilots look great. I'm so glad I was able to finally get those details replaced. All the new weathering is fantastic. I really love the roof and how that turned out with the detail and everything like that. Being able to replace the pilot parts again on the front, getting the correct horn, the new roof details, really refreshed this model overall, and I'm very happy that I stuck with it and got it done. I love the new trucks as well. And again, this is just a handful of examples of the kinds of things you can do to maybe an older model to spruce it up and make it look good. If you guys have any questions on any of these techniques or anything that maybe you'd like to know about with a model like this, just leave a comment below and I'll do my best to get back to it. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and close it down here. And I want to thank you guys for sticking with me on this one. But until next time, I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video, and I will see you there. Take